Well, good morning. I ask you to open up your Bibles to Psalm 36. Psalm 36 is where we're going to begin this morning. Last week I began talking about really the idea of wrestling with our thoughts and the things that we allow to be in our minds, and not just simply things that pop into your mind, but things that we focus on. And this morning I'm going to continue that same conversation. But as far as, just in case you didn't hear last week's, I wanted to start off with kind of what we talked about last week. In Psalm 36, David writes these words beginning in verse 1. He says, "Wrongdoing speaks to the ungodly within his heart. There is no fear of God before his eyes, for it flatters him in his own eyes, concerning the discovery of his wrongful deed and the hatred of it. The words of his mouth are wickedness and deceit, and he has ceased to be wise and to do good." Verse 2, it flatters him in his own eyes. It is amazing how quickly we can deceive ourselves. He flatters himself in his own eyes. We can get caught up in this very, very quickly. I'm reminded in Matthew the 26th chapter as Peter is standing there and Jesus is absolutely telling them that they're all going to sin. They're all going to leave him. He's going to betray him, as it goes on and talks about. But Peter does exactly what he believes is correct. He absolutely believes this to be true. He looks at Jesus. Jesus just told him in verse 31, "You will all fall away because of me in this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." And Peter replied, "Even if they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away." Jesus says, "Well, the rooster's going to crow and you're going to deny me 3 times. Verse 35, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you." All the disciples said the same thing as well. They absolutely believed that to be true. They believed it. And they were wrong. We know this is exactly what's going to happen. Jesus is telling them this is what's going to happen. God tells us, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. We come along and say, we would never allow that to happen. Do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. We do it. We can deceive ourselves so quickly with the things that we see around us. When people come up and tell us, and let's say it's more than just one person or somebody that's very close to you, you have an issue with this, and your answer is, no, I don't, you may want to stop and rethink that. Maybe you do. We can deceive ourselves so quickly. Over in James, the 1st chapter, and again, this is just quickly going through what we talked about last week, laying the foundation for this week. In verse 22, he says, "But prove yourselves doers of the word and not just hearers who deceive themselves." In verse 26, "If anyone thinks himself to be religious, yet does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this person's religion is worthless." Why would it tell us this? Because we deceive ourselves. We deceive ourselves so quickly. Do not just be hearers of the word. Do it. Don't deceive yourself. It's not about just simply sitting in a building. It's not just simply about singing or bowing my head in a prayer or partaking of the Lord's Supper. It's not simply about hearing it. It's about living it, or what happens? You deceive yourselves. Amen, we can pretend, as verse 26 says, that we are religious. You can think that you're religious. You can know that you're religious. And if you can't bridle your own tongue, you deceive yourself. And James says your religion is worthless. Worthless. To further this point, in 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter, when Paul is writing and he's talking about love, he tells us you can be a martyr. You can die for the sake of Jesus Christ. Think about that. Not just sit in buildings. You can die for Jesus Christ. If you don't have love, it means nothing. It means nothing. Don't deceive yourself. Don't flatter yourself into thinking that you're okay with God Perhaps because you look at other people and you compare yourselves, or because you become so blind to the truth. And I suggest to you that there are people that are blind to the truth. There are things that we are struggling with, that potentially you're struggling with, and you're so blind to it that you don't even see it. One of the things as we go through this sermon in this series that I want to make very, very clear is that if your thought is, I'm glad such and such person's here to hear this, or perhaps they heard this last week, I'm talking to you. You. You're the one that's blind at the moment, perhaps. We've got to make sure that we take an honest look at ourselves, to make sure we're not flattering ourselves, that we're not deceiving ourselves, and that we're open and honest when it comes to God's word, and whether or not we're not just hearing it, but we're doing it. We're living it. One of the great examples of this, in my opinion, is going to be in 1 Samuel, the 15th chapter. 1 Samuel, the 15th chapter, and you turn over there. Proverbs, the 4th chapter, verse 23, talks about how we need to guard our hearts with diligence. Be diligent. Out of it becomes the spring of life. Be diligent to guard your heart. Not just guard your heart, be diligent in guarding it. In 1 Samuel, the 15th chapter, we are introduced, we're going to talk about Saul, and Saul's going up against the Amalekites. He was told very clearly what he needed to do. And Saul becomes so blind to the truth here that it has to be told to him time and time and time again. And I'm not sure he still got it. In 1 Samuel, the 15th chapter, he's told, look, I need you to go out, and I need you to go and kill all the people of Amalekites. And he gets ready. He brings 200,000 foot soldiers in verse 4. I mean, they have a huge army. They're going out. They have everything ready to go out. But there was a problem. In verse 8, he captured Agag, and king of the Amalekites, alive, and completely destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep and oxen and more valuable animals, the lambs, and everything that was good, and were unwilling to destroy them completely, but everything despicable and weak they completely destroyed. Isn't that interesting what it says in verse 9? Who let them continue to live? Saul and the people. Saul and the people. He was willing, in verse 8, to completely destroy all the people with the edge of the sword. That is an amazing thing that he does. But that is not what he was commanded to do only. It wasn't that he did almost everything. He was told to do all that God had commanded him to do. But the scriptures are emphatically clear in verse 9. This is Saul and the people that were doing this. Now, you continue on. Samuel comes up, God talks to Samuel and tells him very clearly that I'm going to reject Saul from being the king. And so Samuel goes over and he's talking to Saul in verse 13. So Samuel said to Saul, and Saul said to him, Blessed are you in the Lord, I have carried out the command of the Lord. But Samuel said, What then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the bellowing of the oxen which I hear? Saul said, They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but the rest we have completely destroyed. Man, when you read this on paper, you can see what the problem is with Saul, but this is what we do. We can do this. Oh, God, I'm going to give you the best that I have. That's not what I told you to do. I told you to destroy everything. Well, we're going to bring them back and we're going to offer them to God. Saul believes that what he was doing was correct. We read it and obviously know that it was not. And we can do the exact same thing. I want you to notice the answer Samuel gives in verse 16. He just simply says, stop. I suggest to you that there are people in your life that when they talk to you about things that you are struggling with and that perhaps you are so blind to it, when they say stop, stop and listen to what they are going to tell you. Listen to them. It is amazing when somebody comes up to us and gives us what the proverb writer would talk about being life-giving rebuke. Life-giving rebuke. How quickly we just don't listen to it. We don't listen to it. But when people come up to us that truly love us, and we know that they love us, and they tell us, you've got to stop. You're struggling with this. You're wrong with this. One of the easiest things to do is to deny it. You're wrong. And maybe they are. But it is an important thing for us to stop and to make sure that we're right with God on this subject, in this issue, whatever is being brought to our minds. Because all we're talking about is our soul. And there's nothing more important. Samuel tells him to stop. Verse 16, he continues on and says, "Let me inform you of what the Lord said to me last night." Saul says, "Speak. Speak." I want you to notice verse 17. So Samuel said, "Is it not true, though you were insignificant in your own eyes, that you became the head of the tribes of Israel? For the Lord anointed you as king over Israel." Verse 17 is a powerful, powerful verse. And it should be for us as well. Samuel is telling Saul, look, there's no question that you were from the smallest tribe, and you made it very clear that you knew that. There's no question that you were from a small family, at least in your mind. We know that. You were insignificant in your minds. But God made you king. That changes everything. That changes everything. David, when his wife Michal was saying, the people are not going to respect you for your dancing and what you're doing before God, he says, oh, yes, they will. Yes, they will. Why? Because I'm the king. I'm the chosen. And you know who else is the chosen? We are. We are. We justify so many different things, or we try to blame other people for the things that we go through, and God says, stop! You're my child. You're mine. You've got to understand the value that comes with being a child of God, but also the responsibility that comes with being a child of God. Saul goes on and he tries to blame the people, and he'll continue to do so. So he's told what God said was going to happen. In verse 20, he continues on. Saul said to Samuel, "I did obey the voice of the Lord, for I went on a mission on which the Lord sent me, and I have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and have completely destroyed the Amalekites." And then the three words, "But the people took some of the spoils." Before it was we were going to bring them back to offer sacrifice. But the people. I did exactly what you wanted me to do, God. But the people. God's response, basically, who's the king? Who's the king? It is amazing that it's going to continue on with this same conversation. So you had the fact he's bringing him back. We're bringing him back to sacrifice to the Lord. Now it's the people's fault that we're doing this. And I want you to notice what he says as we get into verse 24. He realizes the things that he had done. In verse 24, Saul said to Samuel, "I have sinned, for I have violated the command of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and listened to their voice." I'm sorry, God, I have sinned. Why? Because I was afraid of the people. You're the king, Saul. You're the king. Here's the interesting thing about this. And we talk about being the king and being afraid of the people. You're a child of the living God, brethren. You're a daughter of the true king. Who are you afraid of? Who are we afraid of? But the people. But the people around us. This is about your relationship with God. Saul, you had every opportunity to do exactly what you were told to do. Every opportunity. And his response, but the people. The dangerous thing is when we fall into that same category. I want you to understand, when it comes to our minds, how quickly we can justify things that we do, things that we write, the things that we say to other people, how quickly we could pretend that we're not afraid of things. There are people that are so blind to that, it is amazing to me. So afraid of the people that it keeps them away from serving the God, the Almighty, their Father, And if you don't think that it can be you, I strongly suggest that you stop and make sure. Strongly suggest. God's people are so unbelievably blessed to be able to even call ourselves His children. You are a son of God. You are a daughter of God. Think about that. The responsibility that comes with that. First of all, let's talk about the value. There is no question that there is tremendous value in the fact that you are a child of God. We've talked about this so often and we'll continue to do so because we are surrounded by a world that will tell you that you're not valuable. You are as valuable as they come. You are so valuable that Jesus came and died for you. Amen. You are so valuable. Understand your value. The world is going to tell you that you're not, mainly because they can sell you things to make you look a little more valuable. And then tell you again you don't have enough value, and we'll sell you something else. And you know why they do that? It's not just simply people outside in the world. Because we fall for it every single time. In church buildings as well. People that sit in buildings have the same struggles. Why? Because we take our eyes off of God and what He tells us, and we worry about the people. In 1 John, the 3rd chapter, in verse 1, he says, "See how great a love the Father has given to us that we would be called children of God, and in fact we are. For this reason the world does not know us, because it did not know Him." We're told that the world's not going to know us, and you know what? That bothers people. And it should bother you unless it's God saying, "You're my child." That's the key to all of this. Our value is so beyond our understanding that we have the opportunity to be called children of God. If we would focus on the first half of verse 1 of chapter 3, we wouldn't have time to watch the nonsense that goes on around us. Focus on it. Our value cannot be talked about enough. Because what we're told time and time again throughout this world is that you have no value. I want you to understand me. All of us. You have more value than you will ever know. God sent His Son to die for you, as I said before, so that you will be with Him for eternity. No one on this earth wants you to be with Him more than He does. For eternity. You don't think there's value? I encourage you, if you struggle with your value, that you begin with the foundation of who you truly are. You're a child of the King. And in being the child of the King, there is nothing that the people are able to do to you. Now, the opposite, or the other side of this is true as well when we talk about the responsibilities that come with being a child of God. The way that we act in this world. Saul was going to be held accountable for what he had done or what he did not do. And you and I are going to be held accountable for the things that we do or do not do in this world. The amazing thing when we talk about Saul is that he would say, "I did most of it." And that's what people say today. In 1 John, the 4th chapter, in verse 4, he says, "You are from God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is He who is in you than he who is in the world." Can you imagine if we actually all believed that? And don't pretend like you do. Unless you take the time to actually make sure that you do. You are from God, little children. You are from God. And you have overcome, or the word conquered, them. Why? Because greater is He who is in you than the one that is in the world. But there are people sitting in this building that are so afraid of the one in this world. And you should be, unless you have a relationship with God. And maybe that's the problem. You are from God if you choose to be from God. The responsibility that comes with that is that we need to remember who we are. How we treat one another is paramount. How we treat one another in this building, if we make people feel uncomfortable in this building, you will be judged for that. And it will be taken care of. How we act in the world, whether we let our light shine, we will be judged for that. We must remember who we are. There are people that are so focused on the things in this world that you are missing the opportunity to realize how blessed you are to be a child of the living God. As we go through this series, I want you to remember this. People that are children of God are not denying what's going on in the world. We know what's going on in the world. Not surprised that it's dark. It's the world. You know what the difference is? I trust God. Come on, brother. I know who He is. We just sang songs about Him. We just sang about Him. If it wasn't for God, I would be as mad as anybody else in this world. Understand that. It's not the denying of what's going on, it's God. That's the problem for some. And the amazing thing is, we can be so blind to think, oh, those people just don't care. They're just denying what's going on in the world. No. You're blind to the reality of the truth. Oh, I would die. I would do anything for God. Okay. Then let your light shine. Stop the foolishness that you put on Facebook. Stop the foolishness of the things that you say. And be a child of God then. Stop the nonsense we allow to come into our minds. And be the child that we have been called to be. It is that what we are striving to do. You turn over to 2 Corinthians, the 10th chapter. I'd like to look at verse 3 beginning. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not wage battle according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful to the destruction of fortresses. We are destroying arguments and all arrogance raised against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. And I just want to stop there. He goes on. Can you imagine if we did this? There are people, even in here, that are using human things, this fleshly thing, to fight. I want you to notice what verse 4 says. What you have is divine power. You are a child of God. You are a child of the living God. When things come into your mind, taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, and people say, how can I do that? Again, you are a child of God. How do you do that? He says you can do it. You give it to Him. We be diligent when it comes to our hearts. I encourage you, as we begin this week, if the Lord wills, to give us the opportunity to continue to let our light shine in this world. I encourage you to make sure that first and foremost, your light is shining. And that we are living the life that shows everybody who we are. Remember who you are. It is a powerful lesson as we go forward and we talk about what it means to be worthy. How much of this starts with my view of myself and whether or not I'm denying the truth. If you do not have a relationship with God, you are denying. Especially if you know exactly what you need to do. I beg you to ask the questions that you have. Romans, the first chapter, goes on and it talks about the fact that God created everything and it's clearly seen. We clearly see a God. We know that there's a God, a creator. That the people that don't believe in him are without excuse. I want you to think about that. Who's the one that should be ashamed? Those who do not believe in God. Do not let the world make you embarrassed by believing in God. Amen. Do not be ashamed of him. Let your light shine. If you need to obey the gospel, now is the time. If there's anything that we can do for you, I ask you to please come as we stand and sing.